I would like to introduce Clare Saunders, who is Professor of Environmental Politics at the Environment and Sustainability Institute, University of Exeter. Clare's main research interests are social movements, protest and environmental politics, pro-environmental behavior change, and climate change policy networks. She has written on how citizens influence politics and why. Also a work called Caught in the Act of Protest and Democracy in Europe and Mobilization of Society. And we're very pleased to have her in the activism section of this 10-day summer school to speak about climate change activism in the UK, continuity and change over the last 20 years. Welcome, Clare.
Thank you very much, Stevan. It's really nice to kind of be here. It's also really strange, isn't it, giving an international talk from one's home. It's now getting on for 15 minutes before 5 o'clock in the afternoon on Friday. So I'm not quite as sharp as I would have been if you'd have caught me at around 11 a.m. on a Monday, but I shall try my very best. That introduction was really good. So I guess you can all grasp from that I've had quite a long career. I've been doing this for about 20 years, researching social movements and doing surveys of people on climate marches, which enables me to kind of like stand at the top of the mountain and look back at all of the things that have been going on over the past couple of decades. And also then to think about continuity and changes in the environmental movement in relation to climate activism. So what I want to focus on in particular is where things haven't changed and where things have changed and how we might account for that. And some of the things that I'm going to talk about are frictions and factions. So obviously there are still reformists falling out with radicals, and that can cause occasional lulls in the amount of protest that's been going on. Radical action took a dip in around 2010 because of undercover policing. I'll say a bit more about that. Leadership and mobilization makes a significant difference. And also I think there's now increasing scientific certainty and this real sense of urgency to do something about the problem that's really made climate activism take off since around 2019. Now, this is a very crude graph which guesstimates the size of the crowd on annual climate change marches from 2005 until 2018. Now, the main reason for showing you this graph, I say it's crude because it's actually very, very difficult to work out the number of people at a protest. Often the organisers and the police have very different interpretations of the size of a march, with organisers often perhaps overestimating, but maybe they get it right and the police underestimate. That's something we don't know. Very, very difficult. So where I have had police sources of the size of the demo and organisers' sources, I've taken the average of the two. But the main gist of the graph, I'm sure it's not entirely scientifically accurate, but it's there to show you that there have been peaks and troughs in the numbers of people attending annual climate change marches. And this is one of the things we're going to try to explain. And then here we have a graph of the number of protests on climate change that were reported in one of the mainstream left-wing newspapers in the UK, The Guardian, between June 2017 and February 2020. And again, you can see it's kind of in a bit of a lull throughout the second half of 2017 with a bit of a spike around the late 2018, and then as you can see it goes up and down again with a massive peak. I mean, I say massive peak, I'm only talking about 6 or 7 reported climate protests in a month, but that looks like a really big peak there, getting on towards sort of like August, September, October 2019. Now what I thought we'd do, and somebody will tell me, Stevan will tell me if this doesn't work, is I thought it'd be kind of interesting for you to see if you can guess the year in which some of these different protests took place. Now, they've got some obvious clues in some of them, but in others of them, it's actually quite difficult to work out when it was. And I think this is important for trying to work out this sense of sort of like continuity and change. So excuse me while I just switch my screen around. Now the idea, and please tell me if it doesn't work, I really hope it does. You can do this on a phone or you can do it on your computer. You go to www.kahoot.it. Can you see my screen with this on?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Brilliant.
So do they have to copy that into another browser or?
Yeah, so basically open a new browser, type in www.kahoot.it and use the code 335556. When people start joining, I'll see that you're joining. Now you can type in your real name, or if you're embarrassed about it, you can just use the code name that the system gives to you. So please do see if you can get on. Can you give me an idea how many people are on the call, please?
It's hard to say because we also have a web streaming version, but over here there are 42.
Okay, all right. So hopefully we'll get at least 20 people. So there's lots of comments coming in. Is this people struggling to get onto it? Let's see what's coming up in the chat.
I can't.
The code doesn't work for me. I can't access. The code isn't accurate. That's absolutely rubbish that we can't do the quiz. Okay, I had sort of anticipated that it was a bit ambitious to try to get this to work. What I can do is just try once more, if people bear with me. I'm not going to waste too much time on it because that would just be tragic to waste all of my time. But I'm just going to try one more time to set it up with a new code to see if it works. It's asking me what my account is and I don't actually know. I'm just going to log in. There we go. It may work this time because I actually set this up earlier and it was fine, but it may have timed itself out. So I'm just going to try again with play and teach. Maybe if people could try just one more time. It's loading a new game pin. I wonder if it will be a different pin and I wonder if it will work.
Six, 3, 5, 9, 5, 5, 6.
Somebody said yay. That's good. We got 2 people on Wondersill, Amusing Cat, Cute Chicken, Mountain Sloth, Golden Dove. It's working. Hurrah. So I'll just wait for a few more people to join. So basically what we're going to be doing is trying to guess the year of these demonstrations here based on the sorts of things people are doing and based on how you think the repertoire of climate change activism has changed over time. I now have 16 people in the quiz. I think that's quite good. It's not going up rapidly, so I'm going to run with that so as to not waste any more time. So I'll click start.
Are we meant to press spin?
So basically this will now just say, in which year did this protest take place? And there's a picture of the protest and you guess, was it 2000, 2004, 2017 or 2007? Okay, so the correct answer was 2007. That demonstration was called The Big Ask, and it was a demonstration that was staged by Friends of the Earth in order to persuade the UK government to sign up to what was then the most ambitious climate change legislation in the world, and that was to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 50% on 1990 levels by 2008. Since then, the government's extended those targets, but you can see that was quite a conventional march, and that was happening in 2007. Let's have a look at the next one. Same again. Oh, this tells us who's winning. I won't waste too much time on that. Okay, second question. In which year did this protest? They're all the same question. So tell the truth. And 2001, 2010, 2019, or 2012. Hooray, 8 people got that right. Well done. So there's a bit of a clue there. I don't know if any of you spotted the Extinction Rebellion symbols. This was in the October 2019 rebellion, which aimed to shut down the whole of London. Many activists went there to purposefully get arrested in order to make the system stand up and take notice that urgent action is required to address climate change. But some people did guess 2001, 2010, 2012. There's nothing apart from really the Extinction Rebellion symbols that make this distinctive for that time period. Let's try the next one. I'll skip the scores. Same question as ever. So when did this protest take place? 2004, 2006, 2009, or 2020? See lots of people there in a rally holding placards. Obviously in central London, this one, you can tell by the, the buses and the setup of the square. 17 answers. 2 people got that right. That was in 2006, and that was a rally known as the I Count rally that was organised by Stop Climate Change Coalition, a significant coalition that brought one of the biggest climate change marches that we've known, apart from in 2009. It was the first time that a huge coalition had been behind an organising effort. Okay, and in which year did this one take place? No ifs, no buts, no third runway, plain stupid. So they're basically here blockading a runway. Was it 2004, 15, 2009, or 2019? 17 answers, 18 answers, 19 answers. So 8 people got that one correct. That was 2015, so fairly recent. But people have been doing this for years as well. Plain Stupid began blockading runways from 2008 onwards, so nothing especially distinctive about the time frame there. Number 5 of 7. In which year did this protest take place? I think everybody looks like they're wearing stuff from the 1980s here, but it wasn't 1980. It was 2019, 2001, 2004, or 2007. Oh, well done. So 12 people got that right. Maybe somebody would like to pop in the chat, just type in the chat why they guessed it was 2019. I think for me, it's quite obvious to look at the age of the people on that protest. They were young people. This was a global climate strike involving youngsters. Number 6. In which year did this one take place? 2018, 2008, 2015. Oh, 2015 twice. Can't be that then, can it? That leaves you with a 50-50 choice of 2018 or 2008. Well done. 8 people got that right. So that was the Camp for Climate Action taking place on the outskirts of Kings North Power Station, where there were plans to build a new coal-fired power station that the government's now shelved. Really remarkable protest action, this one. There was lots going on, including a bunch of 8 Greenpeace activists scaling the chimney and typing on it, Gordon, bin. They were going to say Gordon, bin it, but I don't think they got past writing the word Gordon. They got arrested, they got taken to court, and they managed to get let off of, at their trial because they could prove, using climate scientists there as defendants, they could prove, as witnesses, the climate change expert witnesses were able to prove to the judges that the damage done to the power station was less impactful than the damage that climate change would have on people across the world if the coal-fired power station was allowed to go ahead. But also you'll have noticed in that picture, there were people camping in tents, which is a bit of a hint that this was the Camp for Climate Action. And then the final one, in which year did this protest take place? There's a bit of a clue. I don't know if you can see the placards, but was it 2010, 2011, 2001, or 2002? The correct answer is 2001. The clue there in the placards, perhaps it was a bit too small to see, were pictures of George Bush, who was then president of the US. And this was around the time that the US decided to pull out of the Kyoto Protocol, and it caused mass demonstrations in the UK that were organised by the Campaign Against Climate Change. So let's just see that, or just for a joke, show you the podium of winners. So Rational Seal got 4 out of 7 correct. Dazzled Pelican got 4 out of 7. And number 1, 5 out of 7 by, who's this? Oh, come on, don't waste our time. Wonder Seal. Hey, well done, Wonder Seal. So I hope that was a bit of fun. But I think one of the things we can learn from doing that kind of, oh, sorry, there's the family, that we can learn from doing that kind of quiz is that there are actually a lot of continuities in the types of actions that we see across the years. Okay, so like when we're thinking about continuities, we can see that there's been a range of actions that have been used across the past 20 odd years, including sort of like standard demonstrations, quite expressive acts, as you can see in the picture of the polar bear with the Save the Humans picture. And you can see that the repertoires are similar and there are some changes, but they kind of develop incrementally. So we have seen blockades before, but we've not seen a willing full arrest in the same way we've recently seen with Extinction Rebellion. So they're incrementally developing. There's no massive change in repertoires, no huge surprises over the past 20 years. I think another continuity is that it's been very rare for us to see any form of violence on any of these demonstrations. They mostly pass off very peacefully. Occasionally there might be some scuffles with the police. There's also been, if you look at the placards and the banners and listen to the slogans over the last 20 years, they're actually not that different. You'd be hard placed to know which year you were in based on the messages that were coming across regarding the urgency to deal with the problems. We also can notice that the actions are supported by a diverse movement infrastructure. We've got the main NGOs there. We've also got small grassroots organisations and direct action networks. And this idea of the crisis to humanity and this sense of urgency, I think it's always been there, even if maybe it's slightly more ramped up these days, because I think probably Greta Thunberg's helped push the agenda forward. And the other thing about the climate action movement in the UK is that despite efforts to try to diversify beyond white people, it's tended to fail in doing so. Okay, so that's the continuities, but there's also some changes. You'll have seen from my very first graph that there are ups and downs in the sizes of protests over time. We've also seen a significant shift in terms of the age of participants. We did a survey of people on the global climate strikes and a survey of people on climate change marches and compared those samples. And we found that 3/4 of the people on global climate strikes were under 30 years of age. Whereas on a standard marching from A to B march in London, you'd probably find 1/3 or less. We've also noticed that actions have kind of shifted. Many of them used to be pretty centralised in London or at the site of a environmentally damaging infrastructure. And they've now decentralised and we see a lot more local action taking place. And although we still mostly attract white middle-class people to protest, we definitely have more people doing direct action on climate change. So Extinction Rebellion is much more of a mass movement than previous civil disobedience movements around climate change. It's probably too small for you to see, but one of the highlights of my career so far was the picture on the right. It's an Instagram message from Leonardo DiCaprio where he cites some of my work where I'm saying that Extinction Rebellion activists are quite normal people, a very broad range of middle-class people, and that we should stand up and listen to them. So how do we explain these ups and downs? So I want to try and explain it using this acronym Gyro. And I don't know where it came from, apart from the fact that my PhD supervisor, Christopher Roots, used to have this word just pinned up on his notice board above his desk. And I always used to say to him, what does it stand for? And it's a really nice way of thinking about social movement theory, actually, if any of you are interested in social movement theory, where the G stands for grievances, the I stands for identity, The R stands for resources and the O stands for opportunities. And that captures the main branches of social movement theory. And I want to try and talk about each of those one at a time. So when we think about the G for grievances, 2009, you see there's a big peak here in the numbers of people going on annual climate marches in 2009. And I think we can think about that in terms of grievances. In the UK especially, 2009, it was all over the media being branded as the last chance to save the world from catastrophic climate change. All of the emphasis was on getting the Copenhagen Agreement right. And so here is just the then Prime Minister Gordon Brown saying there are now fewer than 50 days to set course of next 50 years and more. The PM tells environment ministers from 17 countries responsible for 80% of greenhouse gases. And he's saying we're on the brink of a catastrophe if this problem isn't sorted. Now, I'll just go back one slide here. So look at 2009. This was branded as the last chance to save the world. So loads of people turned out to the streets on a massive demonstration called The Wave. I don't know how many of you remember what happened in 2009, but there was a massive sense of disillusionment amongst the public when basically Copenhagen failed. It turned out to be a fairly weak accord that was designed like behind the closet by a small, in the closet by a small group of countries, excluding the participation of many countries. And it was deemed to be by many commentators too weak. So I wonder if at this point people were disillusioned and thinking, why protest? It's made no difference. We didn't end up with a robust global deal anyway. Now I want to talk briefly about the I standing for identity. And identity can cause friction and factions in the environmental movement. And I just wanted to very briefly talk about the Worldwide Fund for Nature. I don't know if you can see here that the icon, the picture representing the Worldwide Fund for Nature has been tampered with here to make it look like a devil. And this was because a direct action group thought that the Worldwide Fund for Nature was doing a massive disservice to the environmental movement by working in collaboration with BP, British Petroleum. Sorry, they rebranded themselves Beyond Petroleum, but it was a joke. They were telling lies. WWF was working with them in a partnership, and the Environmental Direct Action Group thought that was a joke. And there were also some really big debates between those organisations that supported the Kyoto Protocol and those organisations that thought it's too weak, it's rubbish, we should be doing something alternative and much more powerful. And that just happened to coincide with a lull in the numbers of people participating. Now to look at the R, which is for resources. So I want to think particularly around the time of sort of like 2010 to 2012. Well, you know what happened then. There was a massive financial crash. In the UK, there were significant cuts being made to public services. There were significant increases in student fees, and there were massive demonstrations about this. There were something like 125,000 people demonstrating in a march organised by the Trades Union Congress, which I think probably took some of the energy out of climate change activism. So basically there wasn't enough resources to go around, as in not enough people power to go around to feed all of these different movements. So also thinking about resources, we can think about the organisational support for different movements. The climate change march in 2008 was noticeably smaller than the one that happened the year before and the year after. And that's because the campaign against climate change was running that demonstration all on its own, just one organisation. Now, the year before, basically there was a really massive set of demonstrations because of this coalition called the Stop Climate Chaos Coalition, also known as iCount, which was a massive coalition of 60 organisations working on all sorts of issues, from aid, trade, development and humanitarianism through to your more obvious environmental candidates. Even the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, thought to be quite a conservative organisation in a way, bus loaded, or put hundreds of their supporters on coaches and brought them to central London. So resources and movement infrastructure really seems to matter. And then finally, let's briefly talk about opportunities. The political system in the UK is pretty open to people protesting, but there was a bit of a lull, particularly in direct action in the environmental movement in around 2010 onwards, until its more recent revival in Reclaim the Power and Extinction Rebellion. And one of the reasons for this was because a massive scandal was uncovered. Basically, dozens of police officers were leading double lives. They were being activists whilst also reporting on their activism to the special forces. One particularly famous guy, or infamous guy, who did this was Mark Kennedy. That's his real name in the police force. He went by the name of Mark Stone, but was nicknamed Flash because he always seemed to have lots of money to organise actions. And he's one of these activists one of these undercover police officer activists who married an activist, started a family. He adopted a dead child's name as his alias, and it's kind of seen as really unethical for people to be shaping activism, organising actions with activists while also playing a role on clamping down on it. And this has led to lots of debates around whether we should consider environmental direct action to be terrorism or not, but it did lead to a lull in environmental direct action. So we can see that grievances, identity, resources and opportunities explains lulls in protest, but can it also explain other changes in the protest repertoire, and can it explain some of the peaks? And I think it can, by altering what we call the supply of protest. So the supply of protest refers to the people who are organising the protest or encouraging other people to organise it, and the way they're framing their action. And I think the global climate strike is a really good example of this. So as a true leader, Greta Thunberg has been able to capitalise on, making young people realise they've got a grievance here, on giving them an identity as the future generation, as providing a kind of organisational form and platform in which they can exist, which is the R, and in helping them seize the opportunity to do so. So I just put in here a quote from Greta Thunberg, who says, "This is all wrong. I shouldn't be up here. I should be back in school on the other side of the ocean. Yet you all come to us young people for hope. How dare you? You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words. And yet I'm one of the lucky ones. People are suffering. People are dying. Entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you? I can't be anywhere near as powerful as she could." She somehow got this ability to convey this message, which has changed the supply of protest for young people. It's provided a new form of protest that's local, which makes it more accessible to young people. You don't have to travel to central London from all around the country to do this. It's mobilised through schools, and therefore, if somebody in your class is going to one of these, then there's a contagion effect. And it reflects grievances, real grievances that young people have about their own generation, and also encourages them to develop an emotional response to this, and emotions are known to trigger people into protest. It's really pulling on this sense of grievance and this sense of identity. On the 2 global climate strikes that we surveyed in Truro and in Manchester, we found that 78% of the young people surveyed said that they were very angry about climate change. And I think Greta Thunberg has helped to create this sense of anger. And then I've already mentioned that there's always been this sort of sense of urgency, But this has perhaps been slightly more ramped up by Extinction Rebellion, which has created a load of information and guides and handbooks, including this one here on my shelf here. This is not a drill, Extinction Rebellion book, really making it clear how serious this issue is and how it must be immediately dealt with in order to reduce the worst consequences of it. And then, of course, in the UK especially, the newspapers have picked up on the IPCC reports, and then we have popular characters like Sir David Attenborough, who's run TV series and now speaks openly about the threat of climate change. As he said, "As I speak, Southeast Australia is on fire." Why? Because the temperatures of the Earth are increasing. That is a major international catastrophe. And to say, oh, it's nothing to do with the climate is palpably nonsense. The IPCC has warned us that if we exceed 1.5 degrees Celsius of global warming, that will be much less calamitous than if we have 2 degrees of warming. But, you know, there's now recognition that emissions need to be 45% lower than they were in 2010 by 2030, and we need to reach net zero by 2050. This really, because we've not done enough so far to deal with emissions, this is becoming a very critical and urgent issue. So let me now just talk briefly about what might happen next for climate action in the UK. I would guess, and it's a guess, I was guessing this back in 2008, and I've seen it ever so slowly happening, that there's ever so slowly wider and wider public acceptability for climate change civil disobedience. Now, what I'm not saying is that everybody agrees that it's okay to do civil disobedience on climate change. When I was actually in London observing the 2019 October rebel, where there were bunches of activists basically congesting, causing chaos in the centre of London, locking themselves onto vans, supergluing themselves to the Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. There was lots going on, lots of chaos, lots of arrests, slowing down life as normal. There were a lot of people trying to go about their everyday lives who found it really inconvenient and were just wanting the police to rapidly clear the demonstration by force so their life as normal could be resumed. But I think more people are now realizing that the effects of climate change, if we don't address it and mitigate for it and adapt to it starting right now, that those effects will be much worse than a little bit of disruption from some civil disobedience in a major city. We're also seeing some unpredictable outcomes in the courts. Sometimes there are moments of great moments of hope, when the King's North activists that I talked about before, who scaled the tower at King's North power station and started to write Gordon Bennett on it, they got let off. You'd have thought that would set a precedent for allowing civil disobedience on the environment as a justifiable cause, but it's still unpredictable which way it will go. And many Extinction Rebellion activists have been sentenced, have been given fines, and will be in trouble if they're caught again doing similar actions in the near future. Climate action in the UK still has this challenge to try to reach out beyond the usual suspects. You see a very small minority of ethnic minorities turning out to climate change protests. One reason for that in relation to Extinction Rebellion is because ethnic minorities don't have the same affordances in their life to be able to risk getting arrested. Already at more risk of being stopped and searched for being innocent, it's not really a feasible protest tactic for them. So the movement needs to think about ways to try to diversify in terms of ethnicity and also in terms of class. There are still some conflicts between old generations of activists who remember the 1980s and remember how they fought to try to keep coal mines open, to keep miners employed. Those people still exist and think that the climate movement is misguided because it doesn't look after our workers. And that was also prevalent at King's North Power Station. I went there as an academic to observe what was going on at the climate camp. And I remember having abuse shouted at me to go and get a job, and I actually shouted back saying, I'm doing my job. But it's really challenging to try to broaden out to people who rely on carbon intensive industries for their livelihoods. I think we're going to continue to see reuse of existing repertoires, and I think we'll continue to see some tactical innovation. I'm really excited to see what's going to come up in the next few days. We have the G7 here. I'm in Cornwall. I'm going to be observing some of the protests. Extinction Rebellion are planning some demonstrations on the beach near the site of the G7. I'll be really interested to see what kind of tactical innovations come out there. I imagine a nice mix of creativity versus lobbying. And then I think we also have this issue where climate change protest movements in the UK are facing a slightly difficult political environment, particularly if they want to be doing civil disobedience. So in October 2019, Extinction Rebellion was listed as a prescribed group, a potential terrorist organisation. It was suggested to teachers and lecturers that we should be wary if we hear our students talking about the environment in emotive terms. I actually think we should be talking about the environment in emotive terms because it matters. But that's the political environment we live in, and there's some branding now of civil disobedience on environmental action as being extremist or terrorist. But I think overall there's a quite clear message there to go to governments, which is we should be fighting climate change, not fighting the people that can see it happening. And I'm going to end on that note there. Oh no, sorry, I have got a conclusion, sorry. So we can see overall then ups and downs in the amount of people and the types of protests going on over time, and slightly changing repertoires, mostly just tactical innovations on a fairly predictable repertoire. So we're seeing these repertoires. We see that leaders and mobilization are important, the political environment and policing is important, the socio-economic climate is important, grievances are important, and overall the gyro, the grievances, the identity, the resources and the opportunities matter. And then my punchline, my take-home message is that climate protest promises to continue to provide plenty of opportunities for the scholarly study of contentious politics. So thank you. I shall stop there, and I'm going to see if any of these questions in the chat are relevant for me. And I'm also open to any other questions that come up. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claire. That was a wonderful talk again.